afternoon, colleagues and participants and dear friends. My name is Saideh Lotfian, and I'm a faculty member at University of Tehran, and I'm honored to be the chair of the Pugwash Council. It's my pleasure to welcome the two distinguished speakers in this afternoon's panel, and given the fact that we are a bit behind, and I'm sure that you would like to have the opportunity of Q&A after the two presentations. I have asked our distinguished guests to try and limit their talk to 15 minutes each, and they have graciously accepted my request. The first speaker is Ms. Anita Friedt, who is the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Bureau of Arms Control Verification and Compliance. Prior to joining the ABC Bureau, Ms. Friedt served as a Director for Arms Control and Non-Proliferation at the National Security Council. And while she was on the National Security staff, she was a key player in the successful negotiation and ratification of the new START Treaty and worked to update conventional arms control in Europe, strengthen European security, and advance missile defense cooperation with Russia. With that introduction, I want to ask Ms. Friedt to start her presentation.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. It's indeed my privilege to join my colleague Mikhail and Professor Lotfian for this very important discussion today. I want to thank our gracious hosts for a very moving first visit to Nagasaki for myself. It is remarkable that out of a war that claimed so many lives on both sides of the Pacific has emerged an unbreakable partnership. Or as Prime Minister Abe remarked this past April at a joint session of the United States Congress, enemies that had fought each other so fiercely have become friends bonded in spirit. The first Pugwash conference was held in 1957 at a time when the United States and the former Soviet Union were headed down a perilous path, amassing thousands of nuclear arms. 5 years later, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, inspired leadership was all that stood in the way of a nuclear exchange between these two nations. The immense damage that nuclear weapons can inflict was not lost on a future U.S. Secretary of State. A young Navy officer, John F. Kerry, concluded in the late 1960s that nuclear weapons should one day be eliminated. In the succeeding years, the United States has not wavered in its leadership to contain this danger. President Ronald Reagan famously stated that a nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. We have boldly moved past the darkest days of the Cold War when fallout shelters were accepted as immutable facts of life. When Secretary of State Kerry was commissioned as a naval officer in the late 1960s, the United States inventory of nuclear weapons numbered over 30,000. Since that time, the international community has built an intricate and essential system of treaties, laws, and agreements that control the world's most destructive weapons. The United States has been and continues to be at the forefront of this effort. President Obama's declaration in Prague in 2009 that the United States is deeply committed to the peace and security of a world without nuclear weapons continues to guide our efforts. The President cautioned, however, that this goal would not be achieved overnight, but rather as a product of concrete steps toward that final end. Actions speak louder than words, and this approach has led to a collective nuclear stockpile that is a fraction, that is less than 15% of what it was at its high point in 1967. So we have 15% less of 15% of what we had in 1967. Yet, for all the progress, we harbor no illusions that our work is behind us. More can be done and must be done. President Obama has made clear our willingness to negotiate further reductions of deployed strategic nuclear weapons by up to 1/3 below that level set by the New START treaty. Let me underscore this. That offer of President Obama's made in Berlin in 2013 remains on the table, and it is a good one. Progress will require a willing partner in the Russian Federation, as well as a conducive security environment. I want to present some views that take stock of just how far we have come since the depths of the Cold War, and looking forward to building on that progress. I also want to speak on the imperative to list all countries to achieve the end we all collectively seek. When the negotiations on the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, or the NPT, began in the early 1960s, President John F. Kennedy predicted that as many as 25 countries could acquire nuclear weapons before the end of the decade. It is a credit to the strength and effectiveness of the NPT that President Kennedy's forecast never came to pass. This year's NPT review conference concluded without adoption of a final document due to lack of consensus among the parties on an approach to advancing discussions on the proposed Middle East weapons of mass destruction zone. This should not be a cause for alarm. Since the NPT entered into force in 1970, there have been 9 review conferences. 5 have produced consensus outcomes, 4 have not. The NPT owes its longevity to continued salience of the grand bargain. Countries with nuclear weapons will move towards disarmament. Countries without nuclear weapons will not acquire them, and all countries can access nuclear energy for peaceful uses. All state parties to the NPT value the treaty's 3 mutually reinforcing pillars that remain strong even in the face of periodic setbacks. The commitments enshrined in the NPT remain sound, and we believe the parties at the review conference reinforce the fundamental validity of the treaty. Let me turn to humanitarian impacts of nuclear weapons. I know that there are many here who have spoken out strongly, or many in general who have spoken out strongly about the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons. We might have a difference in approach to nuclear disarmament, but we in the United States share the ultimate objective. We do not accept the false choice of whether nuclear weapons constitute a humanitarian issue or a security issue. They are both. Continued progress in reducing nuclear arsenals must take this into account. It is precisely the United States' understanding of the catastrophic humanitarian consequences of nuclear war that informs our desire and our work to ensure that the 70-year record of non-use of nuclear weapons is continued forever. Reaching our common goal of nuclear disarmament must include a process that involves all states that possess nuclear weapons, reflects the realities of the international security environment, and proceeds along the full spectrum or multifaceted approach that has demonstrated multiple successes over the past decades. The United States values new creative ideas from nuclear weapon and non-nuclear weapon states alike to advance this shared objective. Our full spectrum approach to nuclear disarmament involves not only unilateral and bilateral steps, but also multilateral actions that includes nuclear weapon and non-nuclear weapon states as active participants. That is why the United States launched a new initiative, which is called the International Partnership for Nuclear Disarmament Verification. While the political obstacles to achieving further nuclear reductions are well documented, less known are the technical challenges we are sure to face. The earliest US-Soviet arms control treaties did not feature the type of intrusive inspection regimes seen today in the New START treaty. Future arms control treaties and agreements will require even more intrusive provisions. Access to new types of facilities and new items subject to inspection. The international partnership is aimed at drawing on a broad range of expertise and experience to begin tackling these challenges. The partnership enjoys the participation of 27 states, nuclear and non-nuclear weapon states alike. all motivated to seek the tools and technologies needed to effectively verify future agreements on nuclear weapons and materials. The partnership is organized into 3 distinct working groups to address the types of nuclear disarmament verification issues that will confront states as they construct any future inspection and monitoring regime. We are grateful for the cooperation of Japan and other partners in this effort to remove one more obstacle to the future we seek. We also need to make progress on other multilateral efforts. Fundamental to stopping arms races in their track are the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, or CTBT, and the Fissile Material Cutoff Treaty. We in the United States are engaged in a serious effort to inform the public and members of Congress of the national security merits of an in-force CTBT, and progress has been achieved in its verification, the CTBT's verification architecture. Our aim is to reintroduce CTBT to the American public and build the case for ratification by the United States Senate and others. Secretary Kerry said just last week that there should be no doubt that it is in the best interests of our country to join the treaty, and we urge others not to wait. We must also collectively redouble our efforts to commence negotiations on a fissile material cutoff treaty that would finally end the production of fissile material for use in nuclear weapons. A verifiable end to the production of fissile material for use in nuclear weapons and denying a country the benefit of conducting a nuclear explosive test, whether open or clandestine, are fundamental to stopping arms races in their tracks and constitute 2 essential steps that can lay the foundation towards a global reduction in the number of nuclear weapons. While we actively work for the peace and security of a world without nuclear weapons, we cannot turn a blind eye to the current state of global affairs. Threats associated with nuclear weapons and nuclear proliferation in particular remain among the most pressing challenges we face today. This point is particularly salient here in East Asia, given North Korea's illegal and destabilizing nuclear weapons program. It is these very nuclear threats that prompted the President in his 2009 Prague speech to pledge that as long as nuclear weapons exist, the United States will maintain a safe, secure, and effective arsenal to deter any adversary and to guarantee that defense to our allies. Our dialogues with our close allies aim to balance a responsible approach to a pursuit of a world without nuclear weapons with our continuing security commitments. Reassurance that security of non-nuclear weapon states can be protected without pursuing nuclear weapons of their own advances our nuclear disarmament goals. There is no contradiction. As we reduce the role of nuclear weapons, our security commitments will rely increasingly more on conventional means of deterrence. And contrary to what some argue, the nuclear modernization investments the United States is making are fully consistent with the President's Prague agenda and the requirements of the current security environment. Our investments will help sustain confidence in our deterrent and enhance stability. This, in turn, will allow us to pursue additional arms control initiatives. Past, present, and future, the United States is committed to creating the conditions for the peace and security of a world without nuclear weapons. Those improved security conditions are what will allow for further significant arms reductions and eventually elimination. This is not an excuse for delay. Indeed, we are ready to move forward with further negotiated reductions with Russia today. We are ready to complete an FMCT today, and we are ready to sign nuclear weapon-free zone treaty protocols today. But it must be recognized that the conditions for achieving total nuclear disarmament are enormously demanding. The road to a world without nuclear weapons is not easily traveled. The world's nuclear weapons arsenals did not appear overnight, and they will not be eradicated overnight. To reach our shared goal, All states must fulfill their arms control and non-proliferation obligations, and all states must help to harness the next generation technologies to enable further arms reductions. It is only together that we can overcome the obstacles that stand in the way of a nuclear weapons-free world. The United States will not rest in its pursuit of this goal, but we need your help. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Friedt, for the very insightful presentation that you had, and also for keeping to the time. The second speaker is Mr. Mikhail Ulyanov, who is the Director of the Department for Non-Proliferation and Arms Control in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation. He was formerly the head of the delegation of the Russian Federation to the Vienna negotiations on military security and arms control, and he was also the head of the Bilateral Implementation Commission of the treaty between the Russian Federation and the U.S. on strategic offensive reductions. Mr. Ulyanov, thank you for being here, and I ask you to start your presentation.
Thank you for inviting and giving the floor. Like my UN and Japanese colleagues, I have a message to you from my boss. And let me start with reading out the welcoming address to the conference from the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia, Mr. Sergei Lavrov. After this plenary session, I will convey the letter to the President and the Secretary General of the Pugwash movement. So, I quote, "To the participants of the 61st Pugwash Conference on Science and World Affairs, I welcome wholeheartedly the participants of the 61st Pugwash Conference. The conference has been accumulating unique experience for almost 6 decades and has asserted itself as an authoritative and indispensable intellectual platform for discussing topical issues of international security and disarmament. The Pugwash movement unites globally renowned scientists who are interested in preserving the atmosphere of trust and mutual understanding in world affairs and developing inclusive and equitable cooperation. In light of the current turbulent situation in the world and of the persistent attempts to undermine the established strategic balance, the cause of preserving global stability takes on a special significance. I am convinced that the elaboration under UN auspices of effective and workable instruments of arms control and the strengthening of existing non-proliferation regimes will promote this goal. Russia contributes significantly to these efforts and is actively engaged in nuclear disarmament. Our initiatives on strengthening non-proliferation regimes and preventing an arms race in outer space have gained wide support from the international community. I wish you fruitful discussions and all the best. End of quotation. Now, my presentation. Nowadays, many experts, analysts, politicians, diplomats are used to say that nuclear disarmament is in crisis, that it's stagnating. We categorically disagree with that and let facts to speak for themselves. Over the last 25 years, significant progress has been achieved in nuclear disarmament. The first major step was made in 1987 when the United States and the USSR signed the INF Treaty. As a result, 2 classes of nuclear missile weapons were eliminated. About 2,000 ground-launched ballistic and cruise missiles, as well as more than 800 launchers for those missiles, were completely destroyed. A total of more than 3,000 warheads were deactivated. Then followed the START Treaty 1991, the Moscow Treaty 2002, and finally the new START Treaty 2010. The implementation has led to a drastic reduction of Russian and US nuclear arsenals. For example, the Russian nuclear arsenal is already down by about 85% from its Cold War peak. Only 15% of previous arsenals are left. Just 15. It is now roughly at the same level as it was in early 60s, or maybe even late 50s, before the nuclear arms race began. Therefore, we have reasons to say that the relevant provision in Article 6 of the NPT regarding the need for cessation of nuclear arms race has been fulfilled. Moreover, the arms race was reversed, and this is a matter of fact. Our non-strategic nuclear weapons have been reduced by 75% since 1991. I repeat, by 75%. All these weapons are now in non-deployed category. They are non-operational. They are kept at centralized storage sites. And by the way, all of them are located on the Russian national territory. Control over these weapons is not transferred to any other state. These steps, in fact, constitute, the Russian steps, constitute the major de-alerting measure in the history of mankind. All tactical weapons became non-operational. In addition to that, I can tell you that our intercontinental ballistic missiles are on combat duty with zero target missions. They are not targeting any other state. And finally, all Russian nuclear weapons were withdrawn from other states to our national territory. In the late 80s, the USSR stopped the production of fissile material for weapons purposes. First uranium, then plutonium. And this unilateral moratoria on production of fissile materials for weapons purposes is still in force, and we are not going to change it. In 2000, Russia ratified CTBT. Moreover, we are in the process of constructing the second largest segment of international monitoring system in accordance with this treaty. Of the 32 sites to be placed in Russia, 26 have already been certified, and 6 more are under construction. The Russian military doctrine is aligned with the goal of reducing reliance on nuclear weapons. This doctrine is of purely defensive nature, and it hypothetically envisages only 2 cases for use of nuclear weapons. One, when weapons of mass destruction have been used against Russia. And we envisage a possibility, we reserve the right to reciprocate. But once again, reciprocate, not initiate. And second case, in the event of conventional aggression against Russia, when the very existence of the state is at stake. The last version of the Russian military doctrine includes a new concept of non-nuclear deterrence. And thus we move even further from reliance on nuclear weapons. We are going to use non-nuclear means in order to protect our security. to a great extent. Well, against this background, the claim that nuclear disarmament is in crisis seems to be rather misguiding to me, to say the least. At the same time, there are some moderate, I would say moderate, analysts who recognize that nuclear disarmament is underway, but it is going on allegedly too slow. For those colleagues, I usually present just two figures. At the 8th review conference, NPT review conference in 2010, Russia reported the existence in our military forces of 3,900 deployed nuclear warheads. 3,900. At the last NPT review conference, last May, we reported the existence of 1,582 nuclear warheads. It means that just over the last 5 years, we reduced the number of nuclear warheads almost threefold. Is it slow? I don't think so. Like our US partners, we are strongly committed to the idea of nuclear weapon-free world. But like them and other nuclear weapon states, we believe that it should be an incremental, step-by-step process. This is the only realistic way ahead. And this approach is supported by fundamental papers and documents adopted within the context of NPT. For example, the 2010 NPT REVCON action plan underscores that nuclear disarmament should proceed in a way, I quote, that promotes international stability, peace and security, and should be based on the principle of undiminished and increased security for all. Of course, on this topic, there might be different views, but we in Russia believe that relative stability that we have experienced in the last decades stems from a set of checks and balances. Nuclear weapons belong to their number, however distasteful or even disgusting it may seem to some. Hasty action without due regard to a security situation may undermine strategic stability and may cause real trouble in international affairs. By the way, I read with great interest the same idea in the US statement in the first committee just a couple of weeks ago. On this point, we are absolutely like-minded. We should recognize that our world is not yet perfect. Is not yet perfect enough to withstand radical solutions in the field of security. Let us also not forget that most suffering in human history has been caused by conventional weapons, not by nuclear weapons. My country, for example, suffered 27 million lives in the Second World War, when conventional deterrence failed. And I was pleased to hear today in the morning that Pugwash participants, in particular our Syrian colleague, reminded us of the need not to forget about conventional weapons and their negative effect on security and life of human beings. I believe for human beings it's absolutely indifferent if they are killed by nuclear weapons or by conventional weapons. And by the way, our predecessors who remembered apparently better the events of the Second World War took care of obvious fact. And the negotiators of the NPT treaty never addressed nuclear disarmament as a stand-alone issue. Vice versa, they established a parallel between nuclear disarmament and conventional disarmament. People often cite Article 6 of the NPT. Yes, there is a provision on the need for negotiations on nuclear disarmament, but the second part of the same article is totally forgotten in the international community, and it contains an obligation to conduct negotiations on general and complete disarmament. When I remind my colleagues at different international fora about these legally binding obligations, they don't know how to react. Actually, they concentrated on only one side of the problem, and the second side, dealing with conventional weapons, is totally forgotten. There is something wrong in here. Now, let me tell you that recently, just yesterday, I recollected my conversation with one of my colleagues, foreign colleagues, who hold rather radical views on nuclear disarmament and insist on immediate achievement of nuclear weapon-free world. If not today, then tomorrow, according to his approach. When I presented him with our figures on dynamics of nuclear disarmament, which I, read out in the beginning of my statement, he said, yes, I can agree that something is going on. But I wonder how many nuclear warheads you are going to present or report to the 10th NPT review conference in 2010. I honestly said I don't know. I'm sure that the number of nuclear warheads will not exceed 1,550 units. Because under the START treaty, we have to meet this ceiling or limitation together with the United States. And it must be done no later than the 5th of February 2018. So nuclear disarmament is underway as we speak here. And relevant obligations must be fulfilled in 2 years and 3 months. So in 2020, the number of warheads will not exceed 1,550 units. Can this figure be less than that? I don't know, because everything depends on the overall situation, overall state of international affairs by 2020. Unfortunately, arms control people do not pay attention to this particular aspect. And they maybe sometimes do not notice that we observe a number of rather negative trends in international relations which will inevitably negatively affect the prospects for nuclear disarmament if we don't take precautionary measures, if we don't stop the development of these negative trends. I will try to outline what I mean, maybe 5 points. Point number 1, the establishment of ballistic missile system in Europe and globally. According to our military experts, this system, maybe it will protect the United States and its allies, but it will negatively affect the Russian national security and may undermine the ability of the Russian nuclear forces to exercise deterrence. If it happens, the risk of nuclear incidents and conflict situations will be much higher. By the way, until recently, the idea of construction of this ballistic missile defense was justified by the existence of so-called Iranian threat. I can quote President Obama, his speech in Prague on the 5th of April 2009. President Obama stated that, I quote, "If the Iranian threat is eliminated, the driving force for missile defense construction in Europe will be removed." I don't know if the so-called Iranian threat ever existed, but now, with the achievement of comprehensive solution on the Iranian nuclear program, this threat is definitely removed or eliminated, even for skeptics. But the plans of construction of ballistic missile defense are going on without any changes. Absolutely. No adjustment to the new situation. And now American colleagues insist that so-called Iranian missile threat is still in force. I don't know what is it all about, because I can hardly imagine why, what for Iranian leadership may even hypothetically think about hitting European capitals with missiles. It's absolute nonsense, especially in view of the fact that those missiles will not be equipped with weapons of mass destruction. Nuclear problem has been resolved, and Iran fully complies with its obligations under Chemical and Biological Weapons Convention. This fact just proves for us that this system is directed against the Russian Federation. And we need to find a solution to this problem, either diplomatic or military and technical solution. We cannot turn blind eye to a possibility, to the risk of placement of weapons in outer space. I believe this risk is quite real, and it may materialize in 5 to 10 years. If it happens, it will be another game changer, which will negatively, extremely negatively affect the prospects for disarmament, including nuclear disarmament. Let's recollect that there are plans to materialize the concept and program of prompt global strike. It's about long-range conventional precision weapons which will be used to settle strategic tasks within shortest period of time. It may also add or create very unfavorable environment for further reductions of nuclear weapons and achievement of nuclear weapon-free world. Finally, let's don't forget that as a result of NATO enlargement, I'm talking about Russian concerns and Russian security interests. As a result of NATO enlargement, as a result of decisions to move military infrastructure and forces closer and closer to the Russian borders, the balance in the field of conventional weapons in Europe has been completely destroyed. And we cannot forget about it, especially in the situation when the so-called CFA treaty de facto ceased to exist, and new negotiations are not going to be conducted. And maybe finally CTBT, the fact that this treaty is not still in force, almost 20 years after its opening for signatures, is very alarming. And I wish my American colleagues all the best in their attempts to convince the US Senate to ratify this treaty as soon as possible. What should be done? Russia, for its part, is trying to do its best in order to mitigate negative factors. That's why, together with China, we introduced at the Geneva Conference on Disarmament a draft treaty prohibiting placement of weapons in outer space. At the same time, back in 2004, we undertook, made a unilateral commitment not to be the first to place weapons in outer space. Now this initiative, now more than 12 states joined this initiative, in particular China, Venezuela, Brazil, Argentina, Cuba, Sri Lanka, Indonesia, and the number of supporters is growing. Last year, we, for the first time, introduced a relevant resolution of the UN General Assembly, and it gathered about 130 voices in favor. Unfortunately, 4 states voted against, and about 40 abstained. But this year, we hope on further enlargement of the support. I have to finish. The Pugwash movement is committed to the idea of a nuclear weapon-free world. We watched it today at different statements of representatives of the state of the movement. And I hope that the influence of the Pugwash will help to create conditions for further progress towards nuclear weapon-free world, to which we are fully committed. And in this context, I have a request to you, dear colleagues. As far as I know, you are going to adopt a Nagasaki Declaration at the end of this conference. I wish you all the best in the drafting process, and hope that you will find it possible and useful to underline in the declaration the vital need to keep strategic stability in the world as a major factor facilitating the nuclear disarmament process. Thank you.
Thank you. It's very encouraging to hear that the 2 major nuclear weapon states are quite serious about nuclear disarmament and nuclear weapons reduction. But I know that non-nuclear weapon states expect more. And the point is that we have all been looking forward to the achievement of the goal of the long-awaited nuclear disarmament. And it is obvious that a lot of work has been done, but a lot more should be done in order to be able to basically see a world in which nuclear weapons have no military value and no political value. We do have almost half an hour, if we cut 10 minutes into the next panel's time, for Q&A. So I will ask you to just raise your hand. I pick one from this side and one from the other side.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. I'd like to ask a question to Ms. Friedt. I very much appreciate your excellent presentation to advocate the positions or views of the United States. However, this is a symposium to revisit the Russell-Einstein Manifesto. And the essence of the manifesto is, remember your humanity, forget the rest. So allow me to dare to give you an unsociable question to you. My question is, are you, as a member of the humankind, are you satisfied with what you have spoken in the presentation, or do you conceive some frustrations in your presentation? In your presentation, you clearly have spoken. There are 2 aspects of in nuclear disarmament matter. One is humanitarian, the other is security. Yes, I agree with you. So I wonder if you could express your personal, individual view or feelings on this matter. It would be helpful for us to build a bridge between the two matters. Thank you.
Before, I don't know, let me ask you, do you prefer answering each question right after it is posed, or do you want to collect questions? Okay, so go ahead.
So thank you very much for your question, and very eloquently stated. Well, first of all, yes, I wholeheartedly endorse my presentation. It's something that I believe, I can say personally, that I believe and that I am committed to. I've worked in the U.S. government for over 30 years and worked on security issues with Russian colleagues and other colleagues, and it is really a wholehearted commitment to disarmament. But let me just say also, I know there's a difficult question of, as you highlighted here, the difference between, as you pointed out, or suggested, between the humanitarian angle and then security issues. So I stated in my presentation, I don't see a difference. There is no difference. They are both relevant, both very relevant. You can't have one, you cannot have a world without nuclear weapons without having a security situation that promotes that, as my colleague Mr. Ulyanov also stated. I can say that President Obama, when he gave his Prague speech and actually got the Nobel Peace Prize for it, it's interesting. I would say that his speech actually spurred the humanitarian impact movement. One of the things that I have learned, and what I most appreciate about the humanitarian impact movement, is the educational value. It's extremely important that people especially young people, learn about what has happened and learn about the terrible humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons. And that is why the United States works. I mean, the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons is behind everything that the United States does in terms of disarmament.
Thank you. Karen?
Thank you very much, Saideh. My name is Karen Horberg, and as Saideh said, I'm a citizen of a non-nuclear country, which is Argentina. And as such, I would really expect to see a much more active disarmament and much more in the disarmament process by the nuclear countries. We cannot, due to the asymmetry of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, we are totally committed to non-proliferation, and we cannot non-proliferate. We're continually non-proliferating, and we do see that sometimes there is a stall in the talks for nuclear disarmament. So we would expect much more. We would expect a continuous commitment to disarmament. So talking as a citizen from a non-nuclear state. I'm also a physicist, and as a scientist, I like to go with numbers, and I understand things with logic and with concrete numbers. And I would like both of you to explain to me, what is the logic behind the numbers you reach? Why 1,000, why 1,000, why 500 by 2020? What is the logic behind parity between the nuclear weapons you both have in your countries? If by keeping only a handful of nuclear weapons, that would be enough for nuclear deterrence. So I would appreciate an answer for me to understand logically what is behind this. Thank you very much.
Well, as I said, there might be different views on this topic. For me, a threefold reduction over just 5 years is a very fast process. For you, it's very slow, and it does not meet your expectations. It's a natural situation. But once again, I do believe that the process of nuclear disarmament if we speak objectively, goes on rather rapidly. Now, on the numbers. You know, it's not about the numbers. It's about the need, as I said, to conduct, to exercise, to undertake negotiation reductions in a way that promotes strategic stability and diminishes the risk of military conflicts. Our world is not perfect, and it may sound disgusting, as I said, but objectively, nuclear weapons they contain a lot of risks, but objectively they play a certain positive role in the terms of deterrence. Just look at the history. In the first half of the 20th century, we witnessed 2 world wars with dozens of millions of people killed. Since 1945, we did not observe large-scale military conflicts. Why? I believe one of the reasons is that nuclear weapons compel their holders to demonstrate very responsible approach, because in case of mistake, miscalculation, you may see a real disaster of global character. Yes, it may sound disgusting, but nuclear weapons help to keep peace in global, at global scale for the moment. And we need to move further up to total nuclear zero. But we need to be very cautious in order to prevent any possibility of destabilizing international relations, which may happen easily. So the process must continue, and sooner or later it will reach the level of zero. But if we do it fast, the consequences may be extremely negative. You might remember that ancient physicians swear not to make harm. Sometimes road to hell is paved with good intentions. I understand that the idea of immediate creation of a world free from nuclear weapons is very attractive, but it's very romantic and unrealistic, unfortunately, but it's life. Our world is not perfect. So we need to be patient and to continue to move towards the desired goal. That's exactly what we do. And rather fast, once again, 3-fold reduction over just 5 years. Thank you.
The gentleman in the 4th row.
Yes, thank you. My name is Paul Meyer. I'm with the Canadian Pugwash Group, and my question is to Anita Friedt. I was very pleased to hear your statement that the U.S. was ready to negotiate an FMCT today. And given that political will and given the excellent convening authority that the U.S. has, would you envision the beginning of perhaps the Washington process, whereby states would be invited to Washington to commence negotiations of this important treaty, which, as you know, has been a goal for the international community for almost half a century and yet has not yet commenced? And I might just, to Mr. Ulyanov, you having just participated last week in the margins of the UN First Committee in a half-day seminar on general and complete disarmament with the support of the UN Office of Disarmament Affairs, I can assure you that that theme has not been forgotten. Thank you.
On the fissile material cutoff treaty, as you know, obviously we've been trying to work on that in Geneva for some time now. The United States is ready, Russia's ready, many countries are ready, but there's some of the key countries who are not ready. And so we just have to continue. As I said, the United States is ready, but We have to continue working on it.
On general and complete disarmament. Well, I know that relevant resolutions are being adopted from time to time. Sometimes there are side events, sometimes official discussions in the United Nations, but it's, sorry to say, just blah, blah, blah. While we are talking about a legally binding obligation to start negotiations on a treaty on general and complete disarmament. This obligation was taken by states 45 years ago, and it has never been implemented. And I can assure you that in the process of discussions on nuclear disarmament, nobody except for Russia and France remind colleagues about relevant provisions in the treaty. Moreover, nowadays, I will answer your question, Rebecca, regarding a treaty or convention on nuclear disarmament. Well, of course, there might be a convention, might be a treaty. I don't understand the difference, because from the legal viewpoint, both of them are international agreements, legally binding agreements. But in addition to these two options, convention and treaty, there is a third treaty in accordance with the NPT. If you take a look at the penultimate preamble paragraph of the treaty, you will find a sentence according to which total elimination of nuclear weapons should be reached pursuant to a treaty on general and complete disarmament. It is totally forgotten, I can assure you. Now on FMCT. For a number of years, Russia was very active. We tried to advocate the speediest commencement of relevant negotiations. Last year, I participated in the activities of the United Nations group of governmental experts on FMCT. We had 4 two-week sessions. And frankly, as a result of these discussions, we came to the conclusion that this treaty is long overdue. It had to be signed in 1970, 1975. Now it will bring practically no value added, additional value added to the process of strengthening international security. And you know why? Because a legally binding ban on production of fissile material for weapons purposes already exists for 187 states under the NPT treaty. Country X in Europe, Finland, you name them, cannot produce fissile materials for weapons purposes. It's totally prohibited. 4 nuclear weapon states, US, Russia, UK, and France, introduced unilateral moratoria more than a quarter of a century ago. So my question is, what is the value added of this treaty? But at the same time, I can confirm what Anita said. We are not against, we are ready, if consensus emerges around this idea, we are ready to take part, active part in relevant negotiations. Thank you.
Thank you. I have 6 people who have asked for the floor. So I have the agreement of the panelists that we would collect the questions, and then we'll give 2 minutes to each to answer the questions that they like to answer. Ambassador Dhanapala.
Oh, thank you. I have a comment and not a question. It's with regard to the confusion between general and complete disarmament and the priority of nuclear disarmament. I think the 1978 special session on disarmament conducted by the United Nations made it abundantly clear in that major statement of multilateral disarmament that the clear priority in disarmament agenda was nuclear disarmament. Secondly, the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice also made it abundantly clear that the interpretation of Article 6 places an obligation on the nuclear weapon states to negotiate in good faith nuclear disarmament and bring those negotiations to a conclusion.
Thank you. I have a question for Mrs. Friedt, but first I want to thank her for two good, reassuring news that the United States are ready and committed to ratify CTBT and committed to resume negotiations with Russian Federation for disarmament. The question is, how do United States reconcile the decision of going forward elimination of nuclear weapons with the project of modernizations of nuclear weapons? I'm thinking, for example, at B-61, the tactical nuclear weapons deployed in Europe. Thank you.
Rebecca?
Thank you, Rebecca Johnson, British Pugwash. And I want to also commend you for the continuing talks on nuclear weapons reductions. But I noticed that at the UN First Committee, the commendations and the encouragement of that, are many, but also concerns raised about the continuing modernization of nuclear arsenals. And in agreement with you, there are a lot of concerns about conventional weapons, and these are not mutually exclusive. So bearing that in mind, I have just three very short questions. One, do you consider the biological weapons, chemical weapons, landmines, and cluster munitions prohibition treaties to be useful steps towards the elimination of those weapons and towards the prevention and curbing of their use and spread? Secondly, picking up a phrase I think that you used, Anita Friedt, what would you what would constitute a safe, secure, and effective nuclear arsenal in a world where the majority of states are completely non-nuclear, nuclear-free? And could you say a little bit more about the circumstances in which your country's security or fundamental interests would require nuclear weapons to be fired, and what kinds of targets your government would consider appropriate, particularly in light of what we heard in the previous panel about the humanitarian and legal issues?
Thank you. Ambassador Sultanieh.
Well, thank you very much. Although I don't agree with the proposal of no first use, which China has accepted this commitment, the question is why the other four have not so far agreed to commit no first use. I don't agree in principle because no first use justifies to have it, but not to first use. But however, that might be a political gesture. The other question is the timeline. In New York in 2010, Iran proposed that at least 2025 to be deadline to eliminate all nuclear weapons. All five oppose it. Of course, this will turn out to be a non-position at the end of the day in 2010. I was in a meeting of Friend of Presidents with the P5. I proposed them to go out of the room, enjoy a tea or coffee, come back, and they give time, maybe 50 years from now, so that we will have at least a time that ultimately the weapons will be destroyed. And I'm not therefore challenging whether it would be a step-by-step, incremental, just give a timeline. Is it possible that P5 at least sit together and give a time? Regarding FMCT, you know that I was in Geneva CD. This is unfortunate. We had 4 items that we wanted to have collectively all together. FMCT, NSA, nuclear convention on nuclear weapons, and also outer space Paris. But unfortunately, again, the weapon states oppose it, and finally they just pinpoint the FMCT. Therefore, FMCT, without the other 4, nuclear weapon convention has no ultimately, utility. Therefore, this is unfortunate. Therefore, we should not forget the history that all the non-nuclear weapon states, particularly Iran and others, NAM members, they wanted altogether the 4 so that we will have peace and prosperity and stability. Anyway, this is comment. I think this suffices. Perhaps this is food for thought for the 5 weapon states. Thank you.
Thank you. Given the time limit, I'm going to close the list, and I apologize. I apologize to the couple of people who wanted to pose the questions, but I have to give a chance to the panelists to answer the questions that have already been posed. So I would ask you to basically.
I think, let me try to answer, I think the modernization question and a nuclear arsenal seems to capture these, the questions that were directed to me, but the B-61. But first, let me point out that for the United States, we have, at the beginning of every administration, the U.S. Congress obligates us to do a nuclear posture review. And the United States Nuclear Posture Review, this is the guidance for our military and for everything, was done in 2010. And then it was followed up with the nuclear employment guidance a couple of years or 3 years later. But under the nuclear posture review, we looked at this very carefully, obviously our military and the U.S. government, and the decision was made that there would be no new nuclear warheads, no new nuclear capabilities, and no new nuclear missions. This is all, and so what we are doing, we are modernizing, but we are modernizing our facilities, the general infrastructure that is required to maintain our safe, secure, reliable, as we point out, nuclear arsenal. Why do we need a safe, secure, reliable nuclear arsenal? Because it's an important deterrent, as we've both discussed here. It's important to strategic stability to have an effective deterrent, to have deterrence, and in order for deterrence to work, the other side has to, other countries or adversaries have to believe that you have weapons that are safe, secure, and reliable. But what we have really done is to reduce the overall, certainly as Mr. Ulyanov has pointed out, that we've reduced the overall numbers, but then also in terms of what we are doing with the B-61, for example, we are consolidating 4 different variants, 4 different types of B-61s into one new model. And again, it has no new warhead, no new military capabilities, and no new military mission. And in doing so, what we're doing in terms of the consolidation is also to reduce the overall destructive power. We're also eliminating the largest of our nuclear arsenal, largest bomb, which is the B-83, which is the last megaton nuclear weapon. So we're doing a lot of things, but none of these, it's not called modernization. It's continuing to upgrade safety, security, reliability of the arsenals.
I would like to react to the comment provided by the president of the Pugwash movement, Mr. Thanapala. Yes, you are right, and I remember quite well that in accordance with the decisions of the first session, UNJ session on disarmament in 1978, nuclear disarmament was called a priority, no question about it. But I wonder if priority character of nuclear disarmament should mean that obligations of states on conventional weapons are totally forgotten. That's what I talked about. And recently I read once again the text of the final document of the first special session on disarmament and found there a number of very topical provisions which are quite accurate for today. It's once again regarding strategic stability. The session underlined that nuclear disarmament should be conducted in a way which rules out the possibility of superiority of any state or group of states over others. That's what I was trying to convey to the audience in my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Once again, I would like to apologize to Raja Raman and other colleagues who did not have a chance to ask questions. But I would also like for you to join me in thanking the 2 panelists for the wonderful presentation.